All right, so if you've been keeping up with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, then I'm sure that by now you've been exposed in some way, shape, or form to the idea that there is a Ukrainian Nazi problem. Now, again, because of the ongoing invasion of Ukraine, this is obviously going to be a contentious time to talk about something like this, but I think that it's important now, almost more than ever, to get an actual understanding for people about what exactly the size, the scope, the nature, the severity of this problem actually is, for many different reasons that we're going to get into in this video. But first and foremost, just from an information perspective, if you don't talk about the actual real problems with Nazism and far-right militias and coalitions within Ukraine, if you are simply avoiding those entirely, then in my opinion at least, it's going to lead more people who are trying to do their own research and figure out what is going on. It's going to lead more people to be more likely to then find out about some of these actual Nazi problems that do exist within Ukraine and come to the misled conclusion that somehow justifies what Vladimir Putin is doing right now by invading Ukraine under the guise of denazifying them, which is absolutely not a justification for invading Ukraine and is also absolutely not the reason why Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine in the first place. So I do think that it's important, even right now, to talk about this problem and to do so in as honest a way as possible. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into this. So I saw an actual good breakdown, surprisingly, from a mainstream news outlet, NBC News. So even when they are willing to come out and make these cases, again, with accurate framing that this is not a justification for Putin's actions in any way, shape, or form, I think when even the mainstream media is recognizing this problem, you should probably be aware of it and understand it so that we don't overlook potential consequences down the line of our actions right now. So let's just go ahead and get into this. They say Ukraine's Nazi problem is real, even if Putin's denazification claim isn't. So again, that's accurate framing, right? It's a real problem, and yet that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not Vladimir Putin was justified in invading Ukraine. And if you think that Vladimir Putin was doing this because he's some principled Nazi type of guy, you would be absolutely wrong. And I would just suggest you go and do your own research into coalitions like the Wagner Group that exist within Russian forces as well, that are Nazis in the same way that many are within like the Azov Battalion that we're about to talk about right here. So Vladimir Putin is not a principled anti-fascist by any stretch of the imagination, and so of course none of what we're about to talk about is a justification for his actions. But let's go ahead and get into some of the details. They say, of the many distortions manufactured by President Vladimir Putin to justify Russia's assault on Ukraine, perhaps the most bizarre is his claim that the action was taken to denazify the country and its leadership. And in making his case for entering his neighbor's territory with armored tanks and fighter jets, Putin has stated that the move was undertaken to protect people who have been subjected to bullying and genocide, and that Russia will strive for the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Okay, so that's not an accurate claim to say that the entirety of the Ukrainian people are Nazis. It's not an accurate claim to say that the entirety of the Ukrainian leadership are Nazis. Okay, Volodymyr Zelensky, I know this gets thrown around a lot, but he is Jewish himself. Okay, that doesn't excuse everything that he has done throughout his administration at all. But to say the least, it's not that the entirety of the country is just full of Nazis. It's not as if they are running a Nazi-style government where they are purging minorities within Ukraine. That is not the case. So again, they get into some of the details now about some of the actual real problems within Ukraine. So they say, but even though Putin is engaging in propaganda, it's also true that Ukraine has a genuine Nazi problem, both past and present. And they say Putin's destructive actions, among them the devastation of Jewish communities, make clear that he's lying when he says his goal is to ensure anyone's welfare. But important as it is to defend the yellow and blue flag against the Kremlin's brutal aggression, it would be a dangerous oversight to deny Ukraine's anti-Semitic history and collaboration with Hitler's Nazis, as well as the latter-day embrace of neo-Nazi factions in some quarters. So they say on the eve of World War II, just a little bit of history here, Ukraine was home to one of the largest Jewish communities in Europe, with estimates as high as 2.7 million, a remarkable number considering the territory's long record of anti-Semitism and pogroms. And by the end, more than half would perish. And when German troops took control of Kyiv in 1941, they were welcomed by Heil Hitler banners. And soon after, nearly 34,000 Jews, along with Roma and other undesirables, were rounded up and marched to fields outside the city on the pretext of resettlement to be massacred in what became known as the Holocaust by bullets. And they say the Babin Yar ravine, which is where this took place, continued to fill up as a mass grave for 2 years, with as many as 100,000 murdered murdered there. It became one of the single largest killing sites of the Holocaust outside of Auschwitz and other death camps. And researchers have noted the key role that locals played in fulfilling the Nazi kill orders at the site. Now, again, none of this is to justify Putin's actions. And in fact, to give you a perspective, this Babin Yar ravine now, or was just recently, the site of a Holocaust museum and memorial for these Jewish people and for the Roma and other minorities that were murdered by Nazis and Nazi collaborators. So there was a museum that was at this location, and Vladimir Putin just bombed it, okay? His bombs hit that and caused destruction to that museum. So again, he doesn't exactly care about protecting, anti-Nazis, or he doesn't exactly care about protecting Jewish communities. He is literally bombing locations where there are historical sites that are supposed to commemorate this absolute disaster that took place in this location. But they continue saying nowadays Ukraine counts between 56,000 to 140,000 Jews who enjoy freedoms and protections never imagined by their grandparents. And they say that includes an updated law passed last month criminalizing anti-Semitic acts. A little bit late to the party there. Unfortunately, the law was intended to address a pronounced uptick in public displays of bigotry, including swastika-laden vandalism of synagogues and Jewish memorials and eerie marches in Kyiv and other cities that celebrated the Waffen SS. And they also say, in another ominous development, Ukraine has in recent years erected a glut of statues honoring Ukrainian nationalists whose legacies are tainted by their indisputable record as Nazi proxies. And they say the Forward newspaper catalogues some of these deplorables, including Stefan Bandera, the leader of the OUN, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, whose followers acted as local militia members for the SS and the German army. And they say, quote, Ukraine has several dozen monuments and scores of street names glorifying this Nazi collaborator, enough to require 2 separate Wikipedia pages, the Forward wrote. So again, this is not just isolated to like some things that we've seen here and there. I've also seen, like, even just recently in interviews on mainstream outlets like NBC or like MSNBC or CNN, etc., where they're interviewing either civilians or they're interviewing top Ukrainian officials who will like literally have a picture of fucking Stefan Bandera hanging up in their background. Like, you can't fucking do that. I mean, if you don't want people to think that Ukraine has a substantial Nazi problem, don't fucking glorify them. Don't build statues of them, and don't have, paintings of them hanging behind your wall or hanging behind you on your wall as you're doing interviews with Western outlets. I mean, it shouldn't be that hard. And another example that I just saw today that I posted on Twitter was the official NATO account. Okay, the official NATO account was celebrating International Women's Day. That's today, and they post a picture of a Ukrainian female soldier who has the black sun, which is another Nazi, a Nazi symbol, and she has it as a patch on her official military vest. So it's like, again, it shouldn't be this difficult, okay? I'm not saying that the entirety of the Ukrainian security forces are Nazis. They're definitely not, okay? Not by any stretch of the imagination. But holy fuck, if you're going to try to have an optics win and try to not paint yourselves as, a Nazified country, then maybe be a little bit more specific and try a little bit harder to not just put those out in the open for everybody to see. I mean, you would think that it wouldn't be that fucking hard, but I've seen just so many examples of that, even just recently today, that, like, again, the official NATO Twitter account is posting pictures of a female soldier with a fucking Nazi patch on her chest. It's like, it shouldn't be that hard to avoid things like that. But they give more perspective here in terms of the politics within Ukraine. They say far-right groups have also gained political currency in the past decade, none more chilling than the Svoboda Party, formerly the Social National Party of Ukraine, whose leader claimed the country was controlled by a Muscovite Jewish mafia, and whose deputy used an anti-Semitic slur to describe Ukrainian-born Jewish actor Mila Kunis. And so Svoboda has sent several members to Ukraine's parliament, including one who called the Holocaust a bright period in human history, according to Foreign Policy. And they say, just as disturbing, neo-Nazis are part of some of Ukraine's growing ranks of volunteer battalions. They are battle-hardened after waging some of the toughest street fighting against Moscow-backed separatists in the eastern portion, the Donbass region, where a lot of this fighting has been happening since roughly 2014. And one of these militias is the Azov Battalion, which was founded by an avowed white supremacist who claimed Ukraine's national purpose was to rid the country of Jews and other inferior races. And in 2018, the U.S. Congress stipulated that its aid to Ukraine couldn't be used to provide arms, training, or other assistance to the Azov Battalion. But even so, Azov is now an official member of the Ukrainian National Guard. And this is another example that I just saw recently. The official Twitter account of the Ukrainian National Guard posted a video. They have since deleted this, but they posted a video of Azov Battalion members who were dipping their bullets into pig lard because they were getting ready to go and fight Chechen fighters who were coming to join this war effort, who happened to be Muslim. Okay, so they not only posted Azov Battalion members who are open, avowed Nazis, but they posted a video of them doing Nazi shit as if it was something to be celebrated. Okay, again, you're in the middle of a war where Putin is trying to use actual problems that are much smaller in scale than he's trying to portray them as, but he's trying to portray this war as an effort to denazify Ukraine, and the fucking Ukrainian National Guard Twitter account is tweeting out like straight Nazi propaganda in the middle of this war. What the fuck are you doing? I mean, it's absolutely insane that we've seen this level of just open, brazen support for groups like this. And again, they're a part of their official National Guard. Now, plenty of, again, Russian coalitions within the Russian military, they also have Nazis, okay? Again, go look up the Wagner Group and the history of them in all over the world, fighting alongside Russian forces, etc. I'm not saying that the Russian military is has some moral high ground position on the Ukrainian security forces. That's not the point at all. The point is just to say, listen, this is a real problem that does exist within Ukraine and could have potential blowback effects down the line, especially considering that we are flooding this country with weapons. Okay, as pointed out here by Ilhan Omar, she says, the consequences of flooding Ukraine with billions of dollars in U.S. weapons, likely not limited to just military-specific equipment, but also including small arms and ammunitions, are unpredictable and likely disastrous, especially when they are given to paramilitary groups without accountability. So again, the idea theoretically was, well, okay, let's give military aid to Ukraine, but let's not give it straight to the Azov Battalion members. Well, that's not what's happening on the ground. Okay, the weapons that we are giving to Ukraine are being given to Azov Battalion members. They are being given to nationalist and far-right and Nazi battalions and militias that are fighting on the ground right now. That is the reality, okay? You can't just dance around that and deny that, but you can also acknowledge the fact that maybe we should still be giving them some weapons, defensive capabilities to defend themselves from a violent imperialist outside force in Russia and Vladimir Putin that is trying to invade their country. Again, the reason why Vladimir Putin is invading Ukraine doesn't have anything to do with denazifying the countries. He could give a shit about that. Okay, it's much more for geopolitical interests in that he doesn't want Ukraine to have the prospects of joining the West and the EU and NATO, etc., and taking some of these territories and solidifying his control in the eastern portions of the Donbass. It has much more to do with those types of things than it does with an actual campaign of denazification. Putin, that is not his motivation in this war. Okay, so you got to understand that, but you also got to understand that we're giving these weapons. Unquestionably, we don't know where the fuck they're going. Ukraine has been simply handing out weaponry to any civilian that wants to take up arms, which it's somewhat understandable, but at the same time, again, you just have to balance and understand the potential consequences that could come down the line if we enter into a worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario, unfortunately, is pretty much what the U.S. is currently planning for, apparently, behind closed doors at least. So they say here from the Washington Post, the U.S. and allies quietly prepare for a Ukrainian government in exile and a long insurgency. So a long insurgency implying that they are going to, essentially make Ukraine into an Afghanistan 2.0 to try to hurt Russia in the long run, an adversary to the U.S. government, to try to harm Russia, make them fight a prolonged counterinsurgency. And that is not going to be good for the Ukrainian people, okay? It's not going to be good for Ukraine. It's not going to be good for innocent civilians that have to suffer under this long insurgency, etc. Now, again, I'm not trying to act as if I have some simple solution to this crisis and bringing about an end to this crisis. I'm not even saying that we shouldn't be giving them defensive weapons to be using right now. I'm just saying we should be aware of exactly where these weapons are going. We should be aware of the potential blowback consequences of arming and funding an insurgency for potentially years, depending on how well negotiations that are happening right now end up, but potentially funding and arming and supplying and giving intel support, etc., to whoever in Ukraine is fighting this counterinsurgency, which in all likelihood will involve substantial portions of actual far-right militias, etc. And not only that, but you're going to have the blowback consequences of that potentially down the line for the domestic population within Ukraine that is having to suffer under these Nazi militias. But on top of that, we don't even even know what the potential ramifications are going to be domestically and politically for Ukraine moving forward. Because, I mean, what do you think it's going to do to the far-right nationalist sentiments within the country? What do you think it's going to do to the recruitment capabilities of groups like the Azov Battalion to have a foreign invader like Russia invade their country, bomb it into oblivion, and destroy any semblance of stability that they had previously? I mean, this is what sets the stage for a potential volatile situation to erupt, in which a lot of these far-right factions and coalitions do become much more popular and also much more powerful, because we're giving them all of these fucking weapons. Okay, so again, not pretending as if this is an easy solution, not pretending as if Vladimir Putin is a good guy in this. He's absolutely not by any stretch of the imagination. The point isn't to justify what Putin is doing. It's the exact opposite. It's to acknowledge the real problem of Nazism within Ukraine, so that you can have an actual sober analysis of what are going to be the potential consequences of our actions right now. Is it actually a good thing to plan for some sort of a prolonged counterinsurgency that will kill more civilians, will end up being as disastrous, if not more so, than what we've seen in Afghanistan? Is that a good thing? How should we be calibrating this? Let me know what you guys think. I do think that it's, again, important to just acknowledge that these things exist even right now, even when it's a contentious time to talk about this, because otherwise, if you just deny it, then people are going to go and they're going to do their own research and come across articles like that and then say, well, hang on a second, if this is a real problem of Nazism within Ukraine and nobody's been telling me it and they've been simply denying that it exists, well, maybe Putin is justified by going in to denazify Ukraine, but he's absolutely not. And so you got to acknowledge these things, and we should be aware of the potential blowback consequences that are going to come as a result of this war.